Okay, so let's talk about challenges a minute. What kinds of challenges do you face in your life? I think we all face challenges of some sort. Some people are challenged because they're stuck between the job they now have and the job that they'd like to have. And other people are challenged by the fact that they make a certain amount of money and they wish they could make more someday. And some people are even challenged about the amount of income you once had versus what your income level now is. If you're a single person, you may be challenged between being the person you are now and then the person that you will be someday when you find that right person for you. And if you are a person who thought you would be happily ever after once you got married, and you find that you are married or separated or divorced, and that's a different type of person, then that's a challenge in and of itself. Could be that you are challenged in terms of being the parent that you are versus the parent that you'd like to be, or in my case, the grandparent that you are versus the grandparent that you'd like to be. Last week, I was away for the weekend, as you know, and I ran into a person on Sunday night who is a friend of mine from Erie, Pennsylvania, who had served in the church that I served. We worked side by side, and so I've known her for quite some time, and she said to me, as soon as she saw me, she said, "My number one question for you is, are you a flourishing grandfather?" See, she had seen the message that I gave about flourishing, and in that message I talked about being a flourishing grandfather, and she'd seen that online, and so that was a question. And I thought about my status there as a grandparent, and remember, I was in my glory the day that I baptized my granddaughter here just a few weeks ago. But if I'm going to flourish in that role as a grandparent, if I'm going to be in her life, then I will need to see her far more than I do. And that's on me. This is not a secret message to my son who might get this and look at it at a later time. I need to take care of that. And so I kind of have created this personal goal for me to not go more than 2 months without seeing her. There is a difference. There is a difference between what we've got and what we'd like to have. A difference between who we are and what we would like to be, right? And there's a word for that difference, and that word is a word that's the same name as a place where you can buy jeans. It's the same name that describes the space between your teeth, where if you knew somebody like this when you were a kid, they could drink a glass of water and then they could spit a stream of water far out. Yeah, that's the word. The word is 3 letters, gap. So to bridge that gap between where you are and where you would like to be, you need to take action, right? So if I want to be a better grandfather, then I need to take the initiative. That's on me, and I will. Overcoming the challenges we face requires that we do something. And sometimes it's easier for us to take action than it may be for someone else. The circumstances may be different. The gap for some of the challenges we face may be far greater and harder to overcome than it is for other people. I get that. So I'm not suggesting that it's always an easy and quick solution. But if you want to overcome the challenges that you face in your life, then you will probably need to do something. You will need to act in some way. You cannot be passive. So let me tell you what I think is the greatest challenge that we face in our lives. The greatest challenge. The greatest challenge is to grow deeper with God in our spiritual lives. It is to truly open up ourselves to God. It is to allow God to have His way with us. I mean, some of us are familiar with that hymn, "Have Thine Own Way." That's a pretty tough thing to invite God to do. In Psalm 39, the psalmist writes, "Show me, O Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Each person's life is but a breath. Man is a mere phantom as he goes to and fro. She bustles about only in vain. He heaps up wealth, not knowing who will get it. But now, Lord, what do I look for? my hope is in you. For whatever reason, the greatest challenge we face is to grow deeper with God in our spiritual lives. Why? Why are we challenged to go deeper with God? I don't know. I don't know if it's a time thing. I don't know if it's a commitment thing. I don't know if it's something that we think, well, we will eventually get to that before our days are accomplished, but we're not going to deal with it right yet. But you know, this time of year, some people, because of the time of year that it is, take their lawn equipment into the shop to get it ready for the new year. Yeah, if you have a lawnmower, chainsaw, or trimmers, string trimmers, you might take it in because it's just not working properly. You may have tried to start it, but it just won't start right. It started when you shut it off, when you put it away for the winter, but it sat there with this gas in it all winter long, and gas doesn't last forever before it starts to get kind of gummy and stuff like that. So maybe the carburetor's gummed up, maybe the fuel, maybe the spark plug is all charred and stuff like that. Maybe the carburetor needs to be cleaned. But when you try to start it, it just doesn't work right. It sputters and coughs and chokes, and maybe it runs a bit, and then it stalls, and then finally you say, I got to get somebody to look at it. But once it has a new spark plug and fresh gas and a clean carburetor, then it becomes this smooth-running engineering marvel. I mean, doesn't that make you want to go home and cut your grass? Even if you don't need to cut your grass, it just makes you want to get out there and do that. And that's the way that machine was made to run, to do what it was designed to do. And we run best, friends, when we are running deep with God and when we are living God-centered lives. And we know there's a gap between our current me and the vision that God has for us. That's that me that I want to be that we've been talking about over the last couple of months. So what we want to do is bridge the gap. So how do we do that? How do we bridge the gap? Well, there are actually two ways that you can bridge this gap. We can, and you have to stay with me because this is kind of tricky, we can pull the vision toward reality, or we can pull reality toward the vision. Let me say that another way. To bridge the gap between the current me and the vision God has for us, we can pull the vision toward reality. And what I mean by that is we can lower our expectations. We can water down the vision. We can deplete or dilute our aspirations. We can listen to the naysayers around us who tell us we will never be able to do this or that. We can muddle through life as if we are lawnmowers functioning on stale fuel and dirty spark plugs and clogged carburetors. Or we can live the God-centered life that God intends for us. We can remain hopeful and expectant people. Now, guess which one is better? There is a gap between who we are and God's vision for us. And we can address that gap by pulling the vision toward reality, by lowering our expectations, by not working at the vision as diligently as we could, or we can pull our reality toward the vision. We can try harder, we can keep the vision in sight, we can maintain our confidence in God, and we can remember these words from Psalm 39, but now, O Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. Now, none of this happens overnight. None of this happens overnight. So where did we begin in all of this? You know, most of us, all of us actually, began as people who were seeking something. Long, long time ago for some of us, and maybe not so long ago for others, we were seekers. And we were looking for something, but we weren't sure what it was. Even if we've grown up in the church all of our lives, we've had our own pathway of discovery. We must find out our own way ourselves. And so here we are seeking something, and our hearts are restless. We know we need something. We're not sure what it is. We're not sure what we're looking for. And then gradually, and we try lots of things. There are lots of things that we think will satisfy us, will help to accomplish us and make us feel happy. But they don't work. There's still that emptiness. And then gradually God's grace breaks through, and we realize that it's something spiritual that we are seeking, and that we are looking for God. And finally, we hear about Jesus, and we believe in Jesus, and we begin to follow, but perhaps from a distance. And we long to be disciples and companions and imitators of Jesus. And we have a vision for what the God-centered life is like. And we know that it's better, and we want that. But then challenges appear in our lives, and they can come from anywhere all around us. They can come from our homes, or they can come from work, or they can come from recreation. They can even come from the church. And that can cause us to be discouraged, to be full of despair, to be disillusioned. And our vision for what we had hoped for may be blurred, and perhaps we will adjust our vision by not expecting so much of ourselves or God. Because when we get frustrated and when we get challenged, it's hard not to lower our expectations. It's tempting not to expect so much, and it's easy to be like everyone else. Now, if you've been here through most of these messages about the me I want to be, then most of you will say, well, there's really nothing new that you've said so far. It's actually the focus of the study. It's part of trying to become the me that we want to be. But I'd like to elevate our expectations a little bit today. I'd like us to expand our vision, and I'd like us to deepen our dimension of understanding and possibility. Because up until now, we've addressed the things that we'd like to improve in our lives. Like maybe we want a better job, or maybe we'd like to make more money, or maybe we'd like to find that special someone, or we want to be a better parent or a better grandparent. And that's all good. Wanting all of that is all good. There's nothing wrong with that. And asking God to help you to achieve that, to accomplish that, is good as well. But let's call those things kind of like level 1 concerns. Okay? It's what we contemplate and experience most every day. And for sure, you should do your best to want what's best in all of those areas. You should want to be a good parent. But I think there's something more for us, friends. I think there's something more, and we're going to give it a name because it needs to have a name, and so I'm going to call it kind of like level 2. And it pertains to what God may be calling us to be and to do. And it might be something that we've never thought of before. It might seem to be too much for us. It might seem to be much bigger than we are. It's profound and maybe huge. And it has the potential to be life-changing for us and for others as well. And it's the answer to these questions. What does God have in store for me? What is God's vision for my life? What could God accomplish through me if my life was totally submitted to God, if my life was full on with God? When Scott read our scripture for us today, he gave us a glimpse of this amazing thing that God had in store for his people. God had this amazing plan in place for the people who escaped Egypt. God wanted to create a people who were fully devoted to God, and God wanted to give them a homeland. And so God instructed Moses to send 12 spies into the land of Canaan, and they returned with their reports. And this land was spectacular. It was amazing. It was abundant. It was incredible. And not only that, when they got there, the grapes had just come in to season. But they also said that its inhabitants were a cause for concern. And we had 2 reports. We heard from Caleb and Joshua. We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Boy, that's confidence, right? Where does that confidence come from? Well, they were the people of God, and they knew they could do whatever was asked of them if God was with them. And these people themselves had walked through the Red Sea to escape Egypt. So they knew what God was capable of doing. The other 10 spies gave their report. We can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. These are the same group of people, 10 and 2. So why such a lack of confidence in the 10? Because they forgot whose they were. Their impending struggle blinded them to what God had already done and what God could do. They could not get past this enormous challenge before them. And the people voted not to go. They voted not to go. There were 12 spies that entered the land, 12 of them. These were their names: Shammua, Shaphat, Igal, Palti, Gadeel, Gadi, Amael, Sether, Nabi, Gul, Caleb, Joshua. Now, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua, does anybody here know anyone who has used any of those other 10 names to name your children? Want to guess which 2 of the 12 were the only ones who lived long enough to enter the promised land 40 years later? 40 years later. Caleb and Joshua. Imagine being the children of the ones who said, let's not go. Imagine what it was like growing up in their household. And I'd have just been mad at them because we were still wandering around in the wilderness all these years when we could have been in the promised land. Caleb had a vision. Caleb had a vision, and it was God's vision for him. And Caleb clung to that vision. It may have seemed like a huge mountain. He embraced that vision long after he experienced this first setback. But God's vision for him drove him. It kept him alive. It kept him alive. Now let me ask you this today, friends. What great vision does God have in mind for you? What great vision does God have in mind for you? Because it could be huge. Could just be huge. Life-changing, not just for you, but for others as well. Now let me ask you this question. What great vision does God have in mind for us, Ingomar Church? Because it could be huge as well and life-changing. Are you tempted to not find out or to not follow through because you are so overwhelmed by the stuff that's all around you? Because that's a real strong temptation for many of us. So I want to remind you that we are the people of God. That you are a child of the King. And that God has called each one of us and continues to call each one of us his own. Let me tell you the story of Evelyn Brand. When she was a young woman, she felt called by God to go to India. She was a single woman. This was in 1909. And so a calling like that required a truckload of faith and enormous determination. She married a young man named Jesse, and together they began a ministry to the people in rural India, bringing education and medical supplies and building roads to reduce isolation of the poor. Early in their ministry, they went 7 years without a single convert. But then a priest of a local tribal religion developed a fever and grew deathly ill, and nobody else would go near him except for Evelyn and Jesse, and they nursed him as he was dying. And he said from that experience, this God, Jesus, must be the true God, because only Jesse and Evelyn will care for me in my dying. And before he died, he gave his children to them to care for them after he died. And that became a spiritual turning point in that part of the world. And people began to examine the life and the teachings of Jesus, and increasing numbers began to follow him. And Evelyn and Jesse had 13 years of productive service, and then Jesse died. By this time, Evelyn was 50 years of age, and everyone expected her to return to her home in England, but she would not do it. She was known and loved for miles around as Granny Brand, and she stayed another 20 years until under the mission board that she had served so faithfully. Let me encourage you to look at the side screens so that John Ortberg can finish telling you the story.
She's an old lady. Everybody calls her Granny. She has spent her life in India, 20 years of widowhood over there. She is 70 years old. She gets word from the Home Mission Office in England. They're not going to give her another 5-year term. She's getting too old. But she is stubborn. She always wanted to go to the mountains, and they didn't have the resources for that in India. So the mission board said, "You're done now." She had a party to celebrate her time in India, and everybody there cheered her on. And then they all said, "Have a good trip back home." She said, "I'll tell you a little secret. I'm not going back home. I'm staying here." She had a little shack built with some resources that she had smuggled in. And then she got a pony. And she would ride from village to village on horseback. This ancient woman, to tell people about Jesus. She did that for 5 years on her own. One day she fell off and broke her hip. She's 75 years old. Her son, Paul Brand, eminent doctor, comes and says, "Mom, you had a great run. God's used you. It's time to turn it over now. You'll go back home." She said, "I'm not going back home." She said, "God, give me the mountain." She was 75 years old at that point. She spent another 18 years traveling from one village to another village on horseback to love people. Falls, concussions, sicknesses, aging. Nothing can stop her. She's 93 years old. She cannot ride horseback anymore. So the men in these villages, because they love Granny Brand so much, they put her on a stretcher and they carry her from one village to another. She lived 2 more years, and she gave those years as a gift, carried on a stretcher to help the poorest of the poor. She died, but she never retired. She just graduated.
Friends, your deepest longing is to be alive with God, to become the person that God made you to be. You may not even know that yet. You may not even be in touch with that part of you, but your deepest longing, deep down inside, is to be the person that God made you to be. And this life is available to you at every moment. It is the life that is found in Jesus, a man on the cross who mastered sin in his death and mastered death in his tomb and dispenses life now with unparalleled authority. It is available to you in this moment, no matter what your situation. God is at work in this hour, and God's purpose is to shape you to be not only his servant, but also his friend. His purpose is that out of the core of your being shall flow rivers of living water. Living the adventure God planned, becoming the person that God created you to be, is not one pursuit among many. It is why you were born. And it's worth wanting. It is worth wanting more than anything else.